Dr. Jim Young Kim, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming by to talk about some of the things that you've done at the World Bank. It's been nearly 2 years since you were nominated to be the head of the World Bank. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about one of your large goals, which is the idea of ending extreme poverty by 2030. Can you explain, number one, why set such a big and measurable goal? I know you've done this a few times in your history. What is the reason behind setting these kind of goals? And also, is this one really achievable?
The notion that still 1 billion people in the world live on less than $1.25 a day. You know, the previous president, Robert McNamara, talked about extreme poverty, or at that time absolute poverty, as a condition of humanity that is below any rational notion of human decency. As recently as 1990, almost half the people in the developing world lived on less than $1.25 a day. And now, 20 years later, we actually, for the first time in the history of humankind, have a chance to end extreme poverty in our lifetime. What we know is that unless you set a clear target with a clear deadline, people will not change the way they work. So the intention was, not just for us, but for the whole world, if we're going to get to ending absolute poverty, all of us have to work a little bit differently. Certainly we know that we have to do that at the World Bank. If we ignore the bottom 40%, one, it's actually a drag on growth. IMF just came out with a study this week saying that inequality actually slows down growth. So not only do we want to lift people out of poverty, we want to focus on the entire 40% in any developing country that still, even if they don't live below $1.25, their lives are still really difficult.
One of the things that you've done since heading up the World Bank is really bring more of a focus of teaming up with private enterprise.
Right.
Can you explain how that works? What does that look like on the ground?
When you talk about the private sector and development, it's not a question of whether you like the private sector or you come from the private sector or not. The question is, what are your aspirations for poor people? And if your aspirations for poor people are as high as mine, you have no choice. You know, we have to make sure that the private sector participates as fully as they can in creating jobs, in creating the kind of income for people that will lift them out of poverty.
How do you make sure that women and girls are a part of this? How much do you think about that?
If children learn more, economies grow more effectively. And the data on women is overwhelming. Educating girls is just about the best thing that any country can do if they're not doing it. Moreover, several studies have shown that if you bring women into the workforce, you can increase GDP. In Japan, by the way, right. Prime Minister Abe in Davos said 16% we can improve our GDP if women participate in the labor force at the same level as other OECD countries. So what's really great is that the evidence and the ethics are coming together in ways that we couldn't have imagined even 15 years ago.
While you're trying to change the world, you're also changing the World Bank. You're a trained anthropologist as well as a doctor. Would you talk a little bit about how you evaluate a culture and what made you think this was a culture that needed to be changed?
The minute I walked in the bank, I started doing something that actually President Clinton called me and said, Jim, I think you should do this. What he said is walk around the World Bank, go up to every single department, and just ask them some simple questions. And so I went to every single department and I asked two very simple questions. When have we been at our best? When have you been most proud of being a World Bank employee? And the second question was, what keeps us from being that good all the time? And then we went a step further and we did a survey of the entire World Bank group. And usually these surveys are only showed to senior management, but we put them on boards and we showed it to the whole institution. And the evidence was overwhelming that we needed to change. We have tremendous staff who have knowledge from all over the world over many years, and these people, though, were not talking to each other. There was no way for us to move knowledge inside the institution. So I looked around, I talked to a lot of people. One of my friends and a great inspiration to me is Alan Mulally. And I looked very carefully at what Alan did at Ford because he was walking into a very similar situation. And I actually went to Detroit. I actually took some of my team members out to Detroit to see how he does his business review meetings that he does every Thursday morning from 7:30 to 10. And what he said to me was, you may think it's a meeting structure, but this is how you change culture. The fundamental principle is that the CEO has to lead. The CEO has to sit in the room and make sure that people actually deal with each other, that people learn from each other, and that instead of working in silos, 6 regional banks, knowledge not moving, the CEO has to sit and model the culture, him or herself. I think that if we can get our people just to talk to each other and interact in the way that Alan Mulally did at Ford, we're going to discover all of the fantastic strengths that exist inside the World Bank Group.
And I think it's interesting that it sounds like you set about changing the focus of the World Bank, of having a big goal first,
Right.
and then changing the culture to meet that goal. Was that done on purpose?
Absolutely. I think unless you have a really exciting, inspiring goal, there's really no reason to change. And so the purpose was that if you're saying, oh my gosh, now we have this goal, are we ready to actually do this? Then people start thinking, well, maybe we have to work a little bit more effectively. And I think that's happening.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us
Thanks,
today.
Dan.
I really appreciate it.
Great being here.
Okay.
Right.